morning, friends. Today we're going to be talking about Module 3, which was Managing Enrollments or Enrollments Managing, Adjusting Standards to Fill Seats, a case study. I really found this particular case study really interesting, and it's because I have been in situations such as this. In the past. And so basically, we find our boy Max in a really tough situation where he was unaware of the differences between transfer and freshman transfer. So, therefore, with the lack of communication, he didn't realize that he had not met his goal for enrollment. And he's not exactly in trouble, but he is placed in a situation that is rather difficult. So let's discuss. So you're Max. What do you do? Well, the provost is suggesting adding students into classes through the first 2 weeks, which is a methodology that unfortunately a lot of schools will use in order to quote unquote make numbers and make everybody happy. But the way it's said by the provost almost leads into the idea that he says, well, you still have pending applications and you can admit students right through the end of add drop. Like, you have time to fill the hole. And even if he were to add the students, there's no suggestion of actual communication with the students. And as our friend Morgan has told us before, Lamar has done something very similar where they enroll these students. And then I've dealt with it before where we go through, at my old institution, we would go through a massive drop. And we were all given lists to re-add the students the very next day to make numbers. And it's definitely questionable in practice. But we all know too that putting students in potentially that late into classes, especially if they're already high risk, is a total and complete horrible idea. They're already struggling. And all we're going to do is throw them to the wolves and 2 weeks behind. But we don't want to get in trouble or even fired, right? Like, what is the solution here? And I think when we talk about the ethical dilemma, y'all say it with me. Enrollment numbers should never be more important than students' well-being and success, okay? And that is to make everybody happy, we are focused on numbers, and it's very difficult to explain to those who are not immersed in education, such as their board or stakeholders, that it is quality over quantity. And I understand sometimes numbers are necessary, but the interesting part to me is we think about that from a state perspective, but they don't have to because they're a Catholic school. And that's actually my next thing, where what are the current laws or policies? So basically, they're a private institution. A lot of their money comes from endowments. All I can think of is all of the private institutions I know of receive no state funding. Therefore, they are able to do some things that we can't. For example, when I was right out of grad school, I had applied to Concordia University for a position, and they're a Lutheran school, and they can ask you on the application if you identify as Lutheran, or if you don't, what religious sect you belong to. And at a state institution, that's a big no-no because of our funding, but they can do whatever they want being a private institution. So the lines get super duper blurred. There's a lot of red flags here. So technically, I don't think they're breaking any laws. It's just very unethical to take these at-risk students when you don't have any support behind it and just throw them in there so that you meet your numbers. So talking about Zeller and Mosier's freshman W curve, this is so common to see amongst first-time students, and 97% of the time when I talk to somebody, they've gone through this. And it goes from being in this like honeymoon stage to culture shock, to starting to adjust, to mental isolation, to finally getting into integration. And I think what happened for Patrick is he never made it far enough through. Like, he wasn't at his he took too long to progress through the different stages, and that's likely because he didn't have any type of assistance to help him. But I feel like he got stuck in mental isolation and never finished the W, and that's really what could have caused him to be left to his own vices and drinking and having drug problems and all of these things. And so while it's I think that Max's concern with Patrick should be more of a, hey, this kid might need some help versus a, I don't want to admit a red flag kid. Because if you're just looking at the file, you can tell he's not in a great place. And that letter probably was written when he was in a bad place that he had written. But does that constitute not even attempting to help him? Well, if we had the correct safeguards in place and those support services to help these students, maybe we could admit him without concern. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute on another slide. But developing a plan, like we have to work with the provost because clearly there is an issue, and it's communication. There was clearly a lack of communication with what is constituted as a transfer versus freshman transfer. So I think that there needs to be a clear, defined definition of each of those particular items so that we don't have this issue again moving forward. One of the things that I think nobody has mentioned that I think would be vital is potentially working with academic affairs to create a course to help these at-risk students if the provost continues to choose to accept applicants that are not as qualified. The modern day, everybody struggles with enrollment, everybody. And if this is going to be the model where they are going to, I'm not trying to say lower standards because that's not what it is. I believe that all students have amazing capabilities. If they have a certain set goal and students aren't meeting that goal, what can we do scaffolding wise, for anybody in K-12, scaffolding, what can we do to get that student there? And I know a lot of schools offer, SFA 101, or we have EDUC, or, EDUC 1300. It's that basically how to college class, but sometimes the students need a little bit more than that. So maybe we create a cohort. Maybe we create something that helps build a community with these students, therefore that their initial adjustment and mental isolation stages of the W curve might not be as bad because we have literally built in a community for them to help adjust, that they know they can go talk to people, that they don't, if they have issues, they don't have to do it alone. So that's just why, that's my opinion. I mean, I deal with cohort groups all the time, such as TRIO, SSI, Title V. Like, I've see the benefits of doing cohorts, and obviously we're in a cohort now, and we rely on each other heavily, and so it's somewhat of the same situation. I just think that it would be the most beneficial for the students involved. And then we need to talk about Aston, Stanford, and Tinto. Basically, these are the theories that could be applicable in this situation. And I mean, challenge, support, growth. That again goes back to that cohort model I was mentioning. That you have that support, but also if you have somebody that's maybe the cohort leader, that's a faculty, staff, however they decide to, develop that program, they're there to challenge them and support them. And then moving forward, we would need to look at the quality of their involvement in early intervention, because with the cohort model, early intervention is super easy to do when it comes to the challenge and support model, because if you're there with the students in cohort, you can see what's going on early intervention wise, and we can take care of those issues beforehand. And then also with quality of involvement, if we're hands-on with them, we can help them in their journey to decide what it is they want to do with their life, or what programs they want to be involved in, or this or that. And then also social and academic integration from Tinto. That's what we were talking about with the W curve and with a cohort model. That would help these students so much. They would find their friends. They would find friends very easily. Will they be lifelong friends? Who knows? We never know those types of things. But it'll help them academically, and it will help them socially. So, politics and enrollment management. So, the political ramifications of these decisions, this decision specifically with Patrick, could really put a strain between Father Mariani and Father Smith, simply because they do have such a good relationship. And um, Patrick was given a glowing letter of recommendation, but we have to think again, stakeholders, board of trustees, stakeholders, viewpoints. There's a lot that goes into making a decision about something as big as this, about adjusting the requirements for um, board missions and for creating this model. And on the academic side, again, it might be a little bit easier because when it comes to state public institutions, we have to worry about everything getting approved by the Texas Higher Ed Coordinating Board, this, that. The private institutions have their own way of gatekeeping and making sure that that's all smooth. But still, that is a question of how do they feel about it. And the stakeholders often are the folks that are giving all of the money to these institutions. And so, do they really want to cause these issues between, this really good relationship between these two? Also, what's the board of trustees going to say, and what are the stakeholders going to say? Because at the end of the day, money talks. And if we are doing something that stakeholders do not like, the chances of them leaving their funds in our hands tend to dwindle. So we do need to think about that. So at the end of the day, I think about, if I was Max, what would I do? And if I was younger, fresh like he is, to, second year, had no background, really excited, I honestly might do what's being asked of me, even if it's not politically correct. Unfortunately. But that would be me saying that out of fear. As somebody who has been in the field now for 8 years, I would stand my ground and say absolutely not. I will not enroll individuals that are not ready unless we have a plan in place, because we cannot throw them to the wolves. It is not fair to them. It is going to ruin their chances to succeed at this campus. I will not do it. And moving forward, there needs to be a communication plan built, and there needs to be a plan built on how to move forward with the cohort model, in order to, provide a successful opportunity for these students. I mean, I have seen, working with international students at my prior campus, and seeing how the priority was athletics instead of their actual success as students, was incredibly frustrating, as someone who dealt with them exclusively. And seeing that we raised or lowered our TOEFL scores to the bare minimum in order to let them in, and then threw them into the TSI, and their coaches told them to, just fail the TSI on purpose so that you can get into easy classes during the soccer season. That's disheartening, because what ends up happening is they get so distracted by the coach, and they think this is just a great opportunity, that I had so many students that failed. But it didn't matter. That season, they were fine, because they didn't get their grades until the season was over. But they didn't realize that by failing, that they had lost their eligibility for the entire next year. And so the turnover of students was incredible, and it was ridiculous. And all we did was literally make these students' lives so much more difficult than they needed to be. And so I know that might not be the most politically, driven answer for a small East Texas college whose biggest goal is trying to make it on the map in NJCAA sports. But I'm sorry, I think that their success as a person, their success as a student, and their mental well-being are vastly more important than a performance on an athletic field. And so I feel as though if we don't have the proper tools in place, doing things like putting at-risk students in courses when they're not ready is just completely irresponsible and shouldn't happen. And so that was my view on this week's case study, and I can't wait to read about everybody else's.